available.
Well, joining me from Dunedin is Robert Patman, international relations expert from Otago University. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, Miriam.
Good evening. What will be the effect of the UN pulling their observers out of Syria?
I think two immediate effects. Firstly, it will put a lot of pressure on President Assad's regime. While the UN monitors were there, he could at least claim to the world that he was trying to uphold a ceasefire. That level of protection has now been removed. And for the Russians, it's extremely bad news. They've twice vetoed UN Security Council attempts to get President Assad to stand down. They were instrumental in promoting Kofi Annan's plan, I should say. And now that UN mission, which they upheld, has become untenable. And so the pressure is going to become more difficult for Moscow to face down calls for more harsher efforts internationally to quell the violence in Syria.
But meanwhile, what does it mean for the Syrian people? Are they on their own now?
Well, I think in the short term, it certainly there's going to be there's already civil war there, so the situation is already terrible. And as the commentary just made clear, the clip of film that we just saw, the UN monitors themselves have been bypassed. They've been unable to get to the site of massacres in a timely fashion. They've also been shot at, and they've been marginalised by the regime. So, in a sense, we're facing a moment of truth now. And I think the Russians are under enormous pressure. The Putin government faces some very tough choices in the very near future, and there's no signs that the Americans or the British or the French are going to let up in calling for action for President Assad to stand down. They see him as the principal problem.
So pulling these observers out of Syria was more than just for safety reasons. Do you think that there was some strategic measure in this?
No, I think the UN Security Council as a whole wants this to work, and it's interesting that the Americans and the British still reiterate it's the only template they have available for bringing peace in Syria. The fact of the matter is, however, the Syrian government hasn't really been serious from the outset and has, I think, been using this as a mechanism to buy time to crush the opposition. Unfortunately for President Assad, he has not yet crushed the opposition. And so with the UN monitors going and with him fighting for his, political life, he then faces a situation where there's going to be renewed calls for international action. And it won't just come from the United States. The Arab League have been quite outspoken about the need for the UN Security Council to play a much more active role.
Indeed, and the US doesn't want to intervene militarily. But as you say, Russia and China have been standing in the way of non-military solutions. So what's left?
Well, again, Putin has made it clear, President Putin, that he won't countenance use of force, armed humanitarian intervention or armed intervention to try to bring about a cessation of the violence. What he has hinted, however, is that he could envisage a scenario in which President Assad may stand down. The problem for Russia is that the cost-benefit ratio has completely changed in the last week or so. Up till now, it felt that backing Assad, backing the trappings of a diplomatic solution in which Assad had the upper hand was the way to go.
So is this a tipping point?
The problem is, I think it could be, the crucial thing is there may be a makings of a deal. And the deal may be that the Western world will say they will not participate or they will not advocate an armed intervention, but they may argue for the introduction of armed peacekeepers.
How does this all... Sorry, continue.
No, I was just going to say that may be a halfway house solution and may facilitate a transition in which the Russians would then claim there hadn't been international intervention along the lines of Libya, but there had been a mechanism put in place by which President Assad could stand down. Some sort of UN-authorised armed peacekeeping unit, hopefully to separate the two sides, which would facilitate some sort of political transition. But there's no sign of a deal yet.
OK, we do have to wrap very soon. I would have liked to have teased that out a little bit, except that I'm more curious at the moment about what this all says about the efficacy, I guess, of the UN and what it might mean for the UN's intentions from here on out.
Well, I think 2 quick points, Miriama. First of all, I think this crisis demonstrates that essentially the UN is very much an organisation created in the aftermath of the Second World War. It's no longer relevant to the security conditions of the 21st century, its structure. But on the other hand, it's also crucial, particularly in a conflict like Syria, which desperately needs a neutral third party to play a constructive role. We have Syria degenerating into a sort of sectarian conflict, and that's precisely the situation where the UN needs to have more authority and more power. It's up to the great powers, by the way, to give the UN Security Council the authority it needs to act decisively. OK, we'll have to leave it there, but I do appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Robert Patman, International Relations expert from Otago University there.